so really blessed to have this subject, Shambhala. Uh, I wouldn't have necessarily picked it out of the hat, but I find in approaching the research on it and study, uh, I'm totally infused with the passion for where it leads you. And there's a interesting dichotomy always between the light and the dark, the new and the old, and the pure and the impure. And we kind of stand in the middle ground of that in this cycle. In our mind, body, spirits, souls. It reminds me of a wonderful teacher who was in Japan, and Mount Fuji had become very covered over with moss, and it really stank, bad. So they were having great success with clearing water with intention, and even writing words on bottles of water, and they could microscopically see that the cellular expression of the molecule was showing beautiful jeweled formations when it was a higher vibration. And when it was a lower vibration, it was real murky and not solid. So he decided, well, let's try and get 3,000 people. We'll surround Lake Fuji, and we'll put our clearing intentions into the water and see if it has any impact. Well, everyone was okay. Let's try. This works. Everything's worked so far. Experiments that we've done so far. So, as will be on the morning of the show up, everyone at Lake Fuji, instead of like 3,000 people, they had 300 people, and they were like, "Well, should we really do this?" And it was like, "Yes, let's go ahead." So they just spread out farther. And there was a Zen monk who led a vision sharing prayer, if you will. And it goes like this. It says, "The eternal power of the universe has gathered itself to create a world of true and grand harmony." And they repeat it 3 times. "The eternal power of the universe has gathered itself to create a world of true and grand harmony. The eternal power of the universe has gathered itself to create a world of true and grand harmony." So then they took their samples. They went on their way, and sure enough, a couple of weeks later, they had the original samples that were all murky of the water that smelled. And then they showed increasingly beautiful crystal formations over the next month from the new water, the water they collected since they had done the ceremony. And lo and behold, the smell went away, and it held without any odor for a year. I thought of that as, ground zero for pure space, because in Shamballa, we're going to the heights of the world, to the most beautiful scenic grandeur that the visual, oral, experiential can fathom and touch and be in. And it's pure lands. The Masters of Wisdom, which is a huge premise, basis, and teaching of theosophy, really lays the groundwork for our path as students collectively and individually. So it's something HPB, Helena Petrovna Blavatsky, brought an awareness of to the West in the 1800s in establishing the Theosophical movement again here. And it was met with skepticism, naturally, but there were a number of devoted students who had taken up the teachings and felt there was a honest truth about this vision that connected them to higher consciousness, spiritual consciousness, as held by these masters of wisdom. The time of the 1800s in New York and the height of really a psychic excitement in the atmosphere, and people doing seances and manifesting effects that they thought were, the other side, and not knowing, what that was, and ghosts and people who, had passed on and were communicating with us on this side, and loved ones. And there was a whole array of avid interest about this. What really became an advantage was that it opened up our sensibilities to other worlds, other possibilities, something beyond the tactile, three-dimensional bodies and minds and what we see. And it really also converged with a boom in science and exploration, in microscopic awarenesses, and being able to see the stars and the solar system. So we were expanding inwardly and outwardly and metaphysically, if you will. Theosophy and HPB really provided a roadmap for how to traverse this field, and what our path individually is as soul beings on a journey, and what our collective path is as humanity forging ahead in evolution. The time, space function of our realities are always intermixing and interpenetrating. Why, for a second, let's look, just have fun with why we're here at this time, November. Since the sun went down, I'll use my phone light. In The Secret Doctrine, Volume 2, it's page 179, the birthdays of Dionys. I think we're probably all familiar with it, but I'll share a little bit. Theoretically, the kalpas, major ages, right, are infinite, but practically they are divided and subdivided in space and time, each division down to the smallest having its own dhyani as a patron or regent. Padmapani Avalokiteshvara becomes in China, in his female aspect, Kuan Yin, who assumes any form at pleasure in order to save mankind. The knowledge of the astrological aspect of the constellations on the respective birthdays of these Dhyanis, Amitabha, the Amita foe of China, included In other words, on the 19th day of the second month, on the 17th day of the 11th month. So we're just passing that day, today being the 20th of November, 17th of November, and the 7th day of the third month, give the occultists the greatest facilities for performing what are called magic feats. The future of an individual is seen with all its coming events marshaled in order in a magic mirror placed under the ray of certain constellations. But beware of the reverse of the metal, sorcery. So we were thinking, well, what does it mean, a birthday? Really, when you're a Dhyani, a master of wisdom, it's really a funny thing to think about, because in the story of humanity and planet Earth, you have a series of land masses that rise and fall, it's said, and you start with the most pure and most ethereal space bodies of consciousness beings, looking to create life in form on this planet. And that's said to take place on the secret sacred island, which today we know as the North Pole, which is rather inhabitable, but at this beginning incipient stage, with figure 3 different rotations of the equator that we've gone through, these epic periods and cycles, it was like a Shangri-La, a Shamballa, if you will. And then as that period clothed itself and informed itself, the Hyperbolea came up, which was the second great round, and further development of the form body, the work with the Petries, and getting all of the elements in harmony of a grand orchestra of humanity. One can imagine the details involved with how we're born, how we perceive, how we cycle through the periods of day and night. We take all this for granted now, but all this had to develop over time. And there's the secret doctrines full of, I won't go through all of it, just to outline and snapshot that then you have that cycle going down, Lemuria coming up, the third great root race, development of progeneration, really, for the first time, rather than just creating out of your own form new forms. So you have the division of the sexes, and again, we take all that for granted, but it had to be developed. And then as Lemuria went down and these new land masses of Atlantis came up, you ended up with a real giant race of giants. And I guess that turned out to be impractical on numerous levels. So you have, and all of this is being guided by these Kumaras, these soul spiritual beings who have been through manifestation cycles and a historical, speaking in terms of stellar planetary patterning, they've been through these developments before of body, race, minds, and planet Earth being a special place that provided the opportunity for a new cycle like this. It's a huge investment of import to commit to this cyclic patterning and manifestation and growth and death, and Atlantis had, there was great intellectual development, there was scientific development, there were problems, there were issues, there was the moral ethical patterning that was out of balance in some respects, and that's said to have caused part of the demise of the civilizations that were built up to very high levels. And I won't go into all that with, how we came up with the apes and everything, but it took a sour turn, shall we say, and yet the whole division of higher soul spirit consciousness that's the supplier of the creative matrix in the first place, sent that energy to then this round, and the Americas came up. It said that half of the spiritual entities holding the keys to the further evolutionary cycles and all the past history of humanity on this planet went to the Gobi Desert and up into the Himalayas and created a sacred place there that we refer to as Shamballa. There's also said to be representation in Ireland, interestingly enough, of spiritual master teachers who kept the teachings alive there. So when we think of how we evolve and how we meet, and special beings like HPB, how did she even come in contact with the masters? How did they meet? How did this all start in the first place? She was very sensitive as a child. She was progressed. She was, concert pianist at an early age. She was mentally superior to the average people in Odessa, where she lived in Russia. And she was psychically potent to a point where like poltergeist events took place around her. things moved, and if she lost her temper, it wasn't a good thing. So she had a very vivid dream life, and evidently in her dreaming life, she met Master Moria and was guided. Imagine having an experience like that and not having necessarily any outlet for it. I mean, she had sensitive, loving family. She had a loving sister, but it was a very autocratic kind of, Russian male dominant world. And one doubts that she really had occasion to share the depth of the dreams and experiences that she was going through. And yet when her father took her to London, she's about 17, um, there was an event, parade, if you will, representatives going by on the road, and lo and behold, she saw in the Indian contingent the master that she'd been conferring with, if you will, and experiencing in her dream life, who came right over to her and said, you know, don't make any recognition of me now. We'll, you know, there's work to be done in the future, and you'll have a commitment to make if you choose this path, and all will be unveiled at that time. So that's a nice experience in your first trip out of Russia to London when you're 17, huh? You know, imagine, God. And that gave her inspiration and hope that she wasn't mad and it wasn't total phantasmagoria, that these dream visions and the communication relationship that had developed had a reality to it that passed through to this outer world we live in day to day. The rather famous tale of HPB going to Tibet and sneaking in dressed as a man at this time when it was really a forbidden territory. I'd like to share a little bit about it. One of my favorite parts of this, because the Theosophical movement started in 1875 outwardly in New York City with HPB, Henry Steele Alcott, and William Quan Judge. Then it evolved, I won't go through it all, but in Adyar, there was in India a new center set up to really be the center where HPB would do most of her work. And it was a very productive period. Damodar K. Mavalankar was a young Indian of, he came from a well-to-do family, and it said, you know, when he saw HPB, he went down prostrate at her feet, recognizing her. So he was a devoted assistant for her at Adyar, with all the work, all the letter writing, everything had to be coordinated, everybody coming to visit her, plus the teachings and the classes, and you can imagine all the rest. So he was a busy guy. And yet he writes, well, KH's home, or ashram, which was referred to as Little Tibet, and now belongs to Kashmir. HPB wrote a description, says, it's a large wooden building in the Chinese fashion, pagoda-like, between a lake and a beautiful mountain. She added that Master M. Moria often dwelt there. Both of these teachers, she said, rarely came out openly in the world, but they can project their astral forms anywhere. KH's home, or ashram, as a cult called Alcott called it, had more than one purpose, as intimated in letters to William Q. Judge from the Hindu theosophist Damodar, who, in an out-of-body experience, was taken there. Damodar writes, I was in a peculiar place. It was the upper end of Kashmir at the foot of the Himalayas. There were only two houses just opposite to each other and no other sign of habitation. From one of these came out Kudhumi. It was his house. Opposite him stood Master M. Brother K ordered me to follow him. After giving a short distance of about half a mile, we came to a natural subterranean passage, which is under the Himalayas. This is a natural causeway on the river Indus, 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 which flows underneath in all its fury. Only one person can walk on it at a time, and one false step seals the fate of the traveler. After walking a considerable distance through the subterranean passage, we came into an open plain in L K. It's not giving that name out. There is a large, massive building. This is the chief central place where all those of our section were found deserving of initiation into mysteries have to go for their final ceremony and stay there for the requisite period. I went up with my guru to the great hall. The grandeur and serenity of the place is enough to strike anyone with awe. The splendor of the chief's throne is incomparable and has around it an indescribable glory consisting of an effulgence which seemed to radiate from the one who occupied it. And it said that he, besides having the dream vision, that he actually had a astral body journey there again and was led through. Interesting, when you look up Damodar K. Mavalankar, it gives his birth date and ... no death date. That's because he left Adyar Lodge, walked up into the Himalayas, and was never seen or heard from again. So one presumes that he made it to Shamballa, and his life with the masters continued on. One other journeyer that is a Russian who encapsulates the experience of the majesty and beauty of this area wherein we think Shamballa exists today, is Nicholas Roerich. And by all accounts, he was a genius. He was a brilliant painter, world traveler, archaeologist, scientist. He also had a law degree, and he was foremost, he was a theosophist. He was an early theosophist, and he and his wife Helena, they developed a whole school of Russian theosophy. The paintings that I'd like to share with you, if truth, you can set that up. It's about 30 paintings. He did all these while he was traveling. He actually went through the Himalayas. He mounted a huge expedition, and they went through with the intention of reaching Shamballa, which they actually didn't get to somehow, but here's his work. It's the path to Shambhala, that last one. That's the path to Shambhala. Path to Shambhala again.
Philip, I stopped it on this. Do you want to keep cycling through?
No, I think we got a pretty full feeling of his work, and to sense the impression that this had on him, and what it meant to bring that kind of experience back to the West. He traveled all over, and he remained committed to the vision of Shambhala. He ended up, after the war, he had a rough time, World War II. He left Russia, and being a free thinker, and not wanting to get involved with Stalin and everybody who was trying to persuade him one way or another to be an influencer with them. He went to live in India, where he lived out his life in India. There is a map that we have, if you can pull that up, on the Karakoram Mountains. Truth. Yeah. This, I liked it because of the simplicity of it, and it gives the basic relationship between Tibet, this Tibetan plateau, as it's changed in its outlay now with China, but you see where Tibet is, Nepal, India in the north, Pakistan coming up around, Afghanistan, Tajikistan, China. So these are all partake of the greater Himalayas in this Karakoram range. There's another hotspot, if you will, where ancient traditions give insight to Shambhala-like locations. There's a river called the Indus River that comes from the high point here in the Karakoram range and tip of Pakistan. And it goes all the way down through the parallel the Himalayan range, through the Tibetan plateau, and all across China, and empties out some 2,000 miles at the end into the China Sea. You have a choice in how to get to the Himalayas. It turns out, you can backpack with a group of Sherpa and carry all of your supplies and trek up through Nepal into the Himalayas and hope the weather holds for you. That's a journey of great peril. Or you can go through to Hindu Kush up above Kabul, and you can hook up with the Indus River, and you can take a boat down the Indus River, and you just need to decide where you're going to pull over, right, and make your exit into the Himalayas if you're searching for Shamballa. But that would be my preferable route, I think. All who are interested in a journey, let me know. There's great happenstance that occurred here in Topanga. Is we had a gentleman who was a healer and a great traveler through Tibet, Asa Hershoff, and he, it turns out, had taken the 3-year, 3-month, 3 days, 3 hours silent retreat to commit to his monk position. And he came to us, Michelle and I, and he was really adamant about, you got to come, answer me. We were busy with events we were doing. And he said, I must meet with you immediately. Like, okay, what is it? And he showed us this video from Northeast India, right, just beyond that boundary with Tibet, of this monks and nuns doing a 14-day ceremony for healing the planet and sacrifice, everything like that. And it was quite extraordinary. It was very indigenous, very full, and they use Tibetan horns and bells and thigh bone trumpets, and they dance, and they have elaborate costuming, and it was quite impressive. And he said, we have to bring these people here to California. So they had a mission to create a huge retreat center, monastery, if you will. And they had no resources. So they had a practice called healing chud, where they would use the cyclic sounds and music and melodious chants and repetition. And this went on for many, many hours. In the West, they cut it back to 2 hours and then another 2 hours. But in experiencing that, a lot of people would find great relief from neural disorders and psychological impairments and things of that nature. So they call that healing chod. And I said, well, I really didn't know how we were going to be able to help, but we'll see what happens. And lo and behold, I met this woman who was connected with World Festival of Sacred Music in UCLA and the Dalai Lama's work. And he had instituted this whole global practice of every 3 years doing concerts around the world for healing. And the sacred music of every tradition then would be shared and that would be a great beneficence to us. So I said, well, maybe they can come and participate. Long story, a little longer. They ended up taking our invitation and coming, and it was tough. The Tibetans are received prejudice from the Indians, which is a whole thing. I hadn't realized that they're looked down upon by the Indian culture, Tibetans. And so we had to present and get the head of the embassy in Calcutta on our side and really get them to come in. And it worked out, but only 7 of them could come, not 14. The regalia of all of the costuming couldn't come. They had their thigh bone trumpets and their bells and their longhorns. And that was it. And just simple monks' garments. And I'm opening the whole festival at Royce Hall. I'm thinking, well, it's going to be interesting, holding people's attention, 1,500. And but what happened is they came out and they sat on the dais, and their leader is considered a tertan, treasure finder, Kunzang Deshin Lingpa. And he came out and they started doing their melodious chants and music, and people started filing in, and they asked us if we could go longer. I said, well, sure, they can go 14 days and 14 nights, just tell me when to cut it off. And they said, no, we didn't get the tickets sold right, so we need more time to get everyone in with the tickets. And I come back in and it's full. And I see all these people sitting and meditating. This is 2005, right? And you could have heard a pin drop in Royce Hall. And I'm like, well, wow, that's really interesting. And I mean, we are collectively ready for a shift of consciousness if this can happen among the general public. So they ended up, I don't know if you have the link, Truth, to just to give you a taste of what they've created. There's Kunzang Deshin Lengpa, and he had a dream vision of all this down to the millimeter of this great retreat center of spiritual practice. And they call it Copper Mountain, which is akin to Shamballa. And if you scroll down, of course, they work with the Tankas and all the spiritual traditions of the Tibetan Buddhists. Nyingma is one of their main focuses, and continue down.
Hoa.
Oh, that's it. Okay. I was thinking there was another page I looked at, but nevertheless, they also do a Poa ceremony, which is of interest, because Theosophy teaches about the sevenfold nature and the dissolution of the connection with the physical body and the astral body, and the different realms then that go from Kamaloka into Devaka. And those correspond, of course, to our dream cycles and how we let go of our bodies and go into these stages. So their Poa ceremony, through their meditation, they're able to reach states in the after death consciousness and release beings from the Bardo states who are suffering. So that's one of their practices. It was fascinating to meet and get to know these guys. We toured with them. They came back every year for like 6 years before we passed the baton. And so you don't always have to go to Shamballa in the Himalayas. Sometimes Shamballa comes to you. they used to call Topanga their little Himalayas. And interesting enough, the Indian culture here is very vibrant. Tongva is one of the main groups for Topanga Canyon. And Topanga is this place of the heavens. That's how it translates. So there might be some questions. I can go on too long, so I'm beg your pardon for anything. I think of one special gift that came to me while doing this. This is from The Jewel in the Lotus, and Raghavan Iyer, a great theosophist, compiled all of these sharings of spiritual wisdom from all the traditions. So this one's called Shamballa. It says, the way appears but fleetingly. The vision lasts not long, but lifetimes lived in time are as ashes to this flame. O dreamed of Shambhala, I come to thy pure land. And that's a quote from Hermes Trismegistus. So we love the Hermetic philosophy and theosophy, don't we? Sow a thought, reap an act, sow an act, reap a habit, sow a habit, reap a character, sow a character, reap a destiny. So may we all find our Shambhala and journey forth. There's one more thought. Giving and becoming. In trying to give, you see that you have nothing. Seeing you have nothing, you try to give of yourself. Trying to give of yourself, you see that you are nothing. Seeing you are nothing,
Rename it to truth.
you desire to become. In desiring to become, you begin to live. And that's Renee Dolman. This course correlates with our 16th anniversary of Living Wellness Foundation's Walk Across the World series. And that's been for every year devoted to really sharing the work of Mahatma Gandhi,
I should just switch
the
back to that.
HPB, and his work of Satyagraha and Ahimsa, fierce truth and compassion, are always real pillars for what we need going forward in our world today. So thank you for your attention, sharing, and any
Just switch back
questions
to
to celebrate.
here.
Thank you. A second here.
Yes.
Go ahead.
Okay, we're playing with technology over here. You got a question there.
I
You have to
can't
unmute
hear
yourself.
Monica. You're muted.
Let me
There we go. Thank you so much, Philip. This was wonderful. I have a couple of questions. The first of which is when you talked about Cage's ashram and the upper end of Kashmir and the river Indus, what are you reading from?
That's a great question. I couldn't begin to tell you right now. I referenced quite a lot. It was my intention with this subject to find who had the experience of going to Shambhala and even like Nicholas Roerich, he was an archaeologist, traveled all over the world. He mounted an incredible expedition. He went all the way from down near the Gobi all the way up and through into the Himalayas, But from reference of historical reference of people who've traveled in the area, there's actually a video you can see if you do some research on these Europeans and Indians, Hindus, who took kayaking down the Indus River and explored all of the culture along the way in towns. And they weren't necessarily looking for Shamballa, but they knew of the lore of Shamballa. So I'm sorry I can't be specific, but it came from referencing a lot in theosophy in the books. There's a little short line in The Secret Doctrine of HBB references Shambhala. There's not a whole lot else that one can find unless I may have missed it. So, what
Philip?
do you think, Jonathan?
Yeah, that thing about where Mahatma Cage resided, at least sometimes with his sister, that's referred to in the Sylvia Cranston biography on HPB.
Yeah, that's Anita's book on
Anita's book. And where she got it from, I don't know. But anyway, that's one place that a person could.
Damodar, he wrote, he had a big correspondence with William Quan Judge. And they shared back and forth a lot of their experience as chelas and the path, and his descriptions at one point in his writings depicted that. I think that's where the root came from.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Monica.
Yeah, if people would just govern themselves and unmute themselves when they want to say something and mute themselves after they're done speaking, that would help with the feedback.
Okay.
And you're welcome to use the raise hand gesture to let other people know that you'd like to speak.
Speaking of that, Miluka has her hands raised.
Philip, oh my goodness, I always enjoyed your intuition. The way you express your thoughts is sometimes kind of unusual, but I like that it comes from a deeper part of your heart, and I think that's very moving. It's a very difficult subject, and of course we don't know a lot about it, but it seems like you have to be an initiate to be able to even get near there, because I imagine the rules. I read somewhere that they say that Tara is supposed to help you through that path, and she has something to do with the Shambhala. And also, before I forget, I was one of the people who attended the Sound of the Sacred at the Ford Theater. And I remember I was there and it was amazing. I could have never forgotten about it. Navar went with me too. It's just, thank you for that. And congratulations for your anniversary. But anyway, going back to this, yeah, I'm very curious because I read other books in which masters have some sort of mysterious, experiences of people going through the mountains and coming across so many obstacles because, you have to be, I guess, prepared and advanced enough, I guess, to get there. Do you know much about that?
Yes, and again, in some of William Q. Judge's writings, I remember a story he told about going down to South America and into the jungle, and he had intention to go through on this river to a sacred retreat, especially protected by masters, and he had some trouble getting in. It was rerouting, and And then, it was stopping, and there were all these obstacles coming up, and the map was wrong, and he just went through a lot of trouble. And he finally was able to pierce the veil and commune with those higher beings there. And but it took a lot out of him. It's not something he because it was very, very expensive, and so I think he had to pay it off over many years. But the interesting thing to me in part two of Shambhala as a concept is that you have masters on every continent, and you have in the central chief sacred place for the highest beings in our cycle right here with us on earth are in Shambhala, I understand, in the Himalayas. And that's where Maitreya, the future Buddha, is going to be able to come from and really save humanity from ourselves in the coming forward cycles. Now you think of, the other masters in the Middle East, South America, Europe. So we're never without loving care for our spiritual evolution, it seems, and that should give us all heart.
Are there any other questions?
Yes, Stefan.
Shafali, yes. Hello. Thank you. Yes, I really enjoyed your talk. I just wanted to say so. Thank you for that. And I had a couple of questions that are kind of somewhat related. One was I've read a little bit of the Swami Paramahamsa Yogananda's work, and I know he had mentioned in one of his books. I don't know if you're familiar with one of his masters was in India or in the Himalayas too, and was still supposed to be living. So I was wondering if there was if he was also considered one of those masters in Shambhala, or how it cross references with these other stories and different the masters. And then another one which is a little tangential, and that's I think I've heard of that there are some movies or films that have been made about Shambhala and people striving towards them and whatnot, and different interesting things happening. And I know that they're fictional accounts and maybe current modern things feeding into some things, but I was wondering if you knew if any of those maybe had undercurrents of legitimate information, and if by watching any of those you could get any they might be based on some research or something, and I was wondering if you thought any of those were valuable or if you'd seen anything like that. So that's just what I was curious about.
I understand. I didn't catch the name of who you were mentioning at first, though, as a potential.
The Swami Paramahamsa Yogananda, he wrote the autobiography of a yogi, that guy, his master.
Yeah, we know Yogananda's work well, and they have, interestingly enough, we intersected with them at Lake Shrine in Pacific Palisades. They have a Yogananda center that's quite gorgeous on the lake with a temple, and you walk around the lake. It's great meditation, and there's a little garden area on the front end, and there's a sarcophagus, like a little temple, and inside the sarcophagus is none other than, my understanding, the last remaining ashes of Mahatma Gandhi. Turns out Mahatma Gandhi was associated with Yogananda, and they were supportive of each other's work in the world and getting it out there. Mahatma Gandhi, also when he was a young lawyer in London, he came to the London Lodge and he met HPB and Annie Besant, and a couple of students there then had recommended he read the Bhagavad Gita, which he hadn't done to date. So there was a major influence there theosophically. He's definitely Yogananda, having mastership at bringing Western spiritual consciousness and bridging Eastern spiritual consciousness. If you go to any of his groups, ceremony gatherings, they have an altar, right? And in the altar, you have their Indian gurus, and then you have Jesus Christ, and so there's this whole panoply of great masters that they hold recognition of and practice with. And beyond that, I couldn't tell you, how he's evaluated on the theosophical stage
Unmute me.
overall.
It's just, could I mention one thing?
Sure.
I don't know if this is valuable or not, but from what I understand, that the masters have indicated that the theosophical movement isn't their only project. So in other words, we don't know what they're involved with and what they're not involved with. So in other words, could they be in relationship to other world figures or not? We don't know. It's just that it's interesting that and I can't remember my source, to be honest, but I think that I've heard or read that this is not the theosophical movement is not their only effort. And that's about all I got to contribute.
Yeah, when we were touring with Kunzang Daishin Lingpa and the monks and nuns at Zandok Palri, they stopped one presentation and he never did this, and he gave a talk. He didn't speak English, he spoke Tibetan, which was always the challenge to get good translators. And this talk was about the opportunity to bring all the world's religions together here in America and all the leaders to provide a conference like in 1893 for the world community to feel and the collective awareness to be gathered. So it's this sacred, transcending boundaries of hatred, prejudice, and fear, and really putting the work to the metal, if you will. So we don't limit the master's impulses on behalf of humanity, and we don't pretend to take ownership of it as the sole beneficiaries. One humanity, all working together.
Can you take a question from Ken?
Yes, hello there, Philip. Thank you for that wonderful presentation. Very fascinating. I was a little curious. What is the name of that group in the Topanga Canyon area? You mentioned there's a Buddhist group there.
The Indian culture, there are a couple of main groups that were in the Topanga, Santa Monica Mountains region. Tongva,
Okay.
Tongva, Tongva.
Tongva. Okay.
Is one of the main groups. And the Gabrielino is the other one. And the Shumash, of course, pretty well known to people. So they all converged here because you have the ocean and fishing, and you have major trade routes here. So it was a big hub back in the day.
Oh, these are indigenous groups.
Native American.
Like the Chumash. Yeah, the Amerind. Okay. All right. Very good.
Sorry if that was confusing.
And who calls it the Little Himalayas?
Well, the Tibetan monks and nuns of Zandok Palri every year when they came.
Okay.
And the Dalai Lama, who was we were talking with about getting a center going here, is looking at lands to purchase. They feel that way about it because it's sweet. You know, they're not high mountains, of course, you know, but they're very positioned, you know, with the ocean in a jewel-like fashion, one might say.
Yes, yes, I've been through there, and I was wondering. I have my one sister lives in the Woodland Hills area, so she's
Yes.
right close by, and I've driven around in there and had some
Yeah.
visits and events up there myself. Well, thank you. Yeah.
It's interesting when as they speak of the pure light and energy, and Kunzang Deshen Lingpa story goes, you know, he was outed from a cave in Tibet with like terma that he wrote, you know, to the ceiling, and the feeling, you know, all that was written and recorded, you know, over many years, and then he got some of it translated and working with it for the healing chode ceremony. And but then what happened, surprisingly to him, they had a center in Woodstock, and he got a download in Woodstock for a terma. It never happened to him outside of India. And then he had it happen in Topanga, where he just writing for days and days and days and days, went into retreat here, and the term that he wrote is called Garuda. Garuda is like the Tibetan Sphinx of ancient lore, and it's quite a inspiring, fairly long treatise. You know, those are the two terma that came to him outside of India. You know, he's since passed on, but it was unique.
Jim has his hand raised.
Yes, can you hear me?
Certainly.
Yeah. Thank you. Like everyone else, I joined the chorus of appreciation. It was such a wonderful, almost meandering, like taking you through the countryside and then up into the hills and getting a glimpse of, you know, wonderful vistas, the way you put it. It was just very both eloquent and inspiring. But it makes me think that the location of Shamballa is very intriguing. And we sense a natural curiosity or attraction to something like that. But you would think that its deeper meaning, perhaps to us, is the fact that it becomes like an archetype that satisfies a spiritual hunger for a country or a community in which the wise and the truly spiritually virtuous are those who are the true royalty, and they inspire a harmony of feeling and fellowship. It must be so deeply satisfying, so enriching of the soul. And this itself, like an Akashic model, becomes something like why the Ramayana still speaks to people after 1 million years, according to theosophical chronology. It continues to be like a beautiful river that nourishes the plains. And furthermore, you get perhaps in Plato's Republic, there's something of Shambhala in that as well. And that then becomes also the basis of inspiration for so many utopians, which really means nowhere and everywhere. So that a utopian is never completely incarnated, and neither is Shambhala, you would think. It could be multiple centers because it's a state of high exalted consciousness in which these great beings exist, beings we can trust, beings who also are completely devoted to the well-being of all its denizens because they connect it to the cosmos. So it's just must be quite a wonderful thing. looking at it that way, so to speak, and how it's always in Kali Yuga going to be a source of nourishment. The idea of Shambhala.
Beautiful. Yes. Yes, yes, and more yes. I'm struck by always that thought that, ages overlap, create cycles. So yeah, we're in the dark ages, but it's right now, 5,000 year point, we're circling around. You have the seed of the golden age begins here, begins now. And there must be carriers of that seed in nascent expression among us. So your point's well taken that there are many Shamballas. And then, how we link up and connect with our inner spiritual Atma Buddhi Manas and the higher Manas, and our own inner Shambhala through meditation, right thought, right deed, right action, motive. The sense and sensibility is always there among us, and it's always the practice, and tripping and falling and getting back up and practicing again, and just never retreating, never giving up, always going forward, knowing that there's a humongous support for this work in the world. Even though we might not see it, we might not get to Shambhala ourselves, but knowing it, knowing the presence of it, who knows what dreams may come,
Couldn't agree with you. Thank you, Philip. That's very beautiful. There's a last point. It reminds me of, I think I might have mentioned it before, but Einstein's comment about that he's genuinely, he's a kind of a solitary figure, he said. I'm something of a solitary person, but in reality, I feel a deep sense of communion with all those individuals on the globe who love the true, the good, and the just. I feel a fellowship with them, no matter who they are and where they are. And that sustains and nourishes and replenishes me.
That is beautiful. Yeah, I always love that. And I was thinking, at a different point in time, a scientist and humanitarian of that caliber, as Einstein was, a philosopher, he would be considered certainly of guru caliber, won't you think?
Yes, I do. I find his, yes, he was a very remarkable man in many ways. One of the peculiar things was someone who became the editor. I think he was the editor for Atlantic Monthly. I'm sorry, the magazine. It's a well-known magazine, but he's editor, and he was taken to meet Einstein, and he was with the president of some college. Oh no, it was a Jewish eminent Jewish thinker. Anyway, they were both going along, and they met Einstein. Well, this man who was an editor of the magazine, he looked at Einstein. It was getting into a car, and when he saw Einstein, he suddenly saw this incredible purity that hit him like a thunderbolt, and it almost literally knocked him off his feet, because it was like something so pure, so full of light, so iridescent, that it shook him to the roots. And after the whole meeting was over with Einstein, he had to confess to this wonderful Jewish philosopher, I don't know what happened. I don't know how to put this in any framework of reality. And this man said to him, I know exactly what you mean. For a moment, the doors of perception were open, and you got a glimpse of the divine that's in everyone. And that man said he never forgot that experience with Einstein or what that man taught him. It's just a beautiful example of kind of something pure in a being who's very remarkable in many ways.
Beautiful. Yeah, thanks for sharing that.
Yeah.
Wonderful.
Well, I think our time is up, and I thank you very, very much, Philip, for taking us to Shamballa and for renewing in our hearts and our minds the existence of Shamballa, whether it's a place or whether it's everywhere and nowhere, or whether it's a community of souls. And it's very appropriate that you brought up November 17th and those other sacred days. And this is the timing of this is obviously in connection with that. So thank you very, very much. I will just remind us. I'm looking at Monica's chat there. Magnificent. So let me just, I'll just mention a few other ones coming up. Pierre Wouter will help us understand this idea of elementals. We hear about elementals in Rosicrucian lore, and he will help us with the kind of a theosophical understanding of elementals and how they're part of everything. And then Desiree will help us. She spoke about light in a pretty incredible way a couple of weeks ago. She's going to circle back around and help us understand the idea of sound, the sacred idea of sound. And then we will be doing one on Origen, the Christian church father who is also an initiate. That'll be on the 11th of December. And then on the 18th, Miluka will take us to the spiritual sun and back, but also she'll be tying it in with the winter solstice season, of course, which she does so well. And then Ken Campos on Christmas Day. So we thank you so much, Ken, for doing this. Will help us understand a subject that is very much related to Shamballa, which is the idea of bodhicitta. So
Yeah.
thank you all very much for coming.
Thank you, Jonathan, for hosting.
Yeah, looking forward to all of it and the sound.
Yeah. They're all incredible. So thank you, Philip, very much for helping us understand this sacred idea.
Thank you to everybody. You know, you can't do this alone.
Thank you, Philip. Very
Take care.
inspiring.
Take care.
Appreciate it. Bye-bye.